Quer desenvolver os talentos da sua equipe e potencializar os resultados da sua empresa? Conte com a expertise do atendimento corporativo do Senac São Paulo, que já capacitou mais de 1 milhão de pessoas e profissionais de instituições públicas, privadas e terceiro setor. Construa uma equipe altamente motivada e capacitada e destaque-se no mercado. Entre em contato, acesse sp.senac.br/corporativo e saiba mais. Quer saber? Senac.
This is More Money with economist Steve Moore. Now, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WBC Talk Radio and many affiliates throughout the country. Thanks so much for taking some time out of your weekend to become informed about what is going on with our nation's finances, our economy, the political situation. For those of you who are just joining, I got on my soapbox, which I don't always do on the show, but I feel so strongly about this new report that has come out on our nation's finances, and it is frightening, folks. It is something that should wake up every American. And I said it earlier, I'm going to say it again. I'm not blaming this on Joe Biden exclusively. Joe Biden deserves a lot of the blame, but it's Republicans, Democrats, our politicians are running our country over a financial cliff, and it is not going to be pretty if it continues. So I wanted to bring into the conversation a good friend, an excellent economist. He is one of the leading economists at the Heritage Foundation. He works with me at Unleashed Prosperity. You see him on Fox News and other popular programs. EJ Antoni. EJ, thanks for joining this afternoon.
Steve, thank you so much for having me.
So let's get right down to it, EJ. I was telling my audience that I've been doing this for 40 years. I've been doing it a lot longer than you have. But, I've looked at these annual reports on the budget. And this one that we just saw this week from the Congressional Budget Office with these $2 trillion deficits for as far as the eye can see, I believe that this is a prescription for national disaster. What say you?
Oh, Steve, I could not have put it any better myself. I mean, really, if people want to know what does it mean to spend an extra $50 trillion that we don't have, well, look at what has happened the past few years when we spent just a few trillion, let's call it right. 6 or 7 trillion that we didn't have. We got 40-year high inflation. What do we think is going to happen if we put that on steroids, if we do something 10x as big? I mean, that's what the CBO is telling us. We are staring down the barrel of a cannon at this point.
So I think it's very well put. As you know, EJ, and the Wall Street Journal put this very well in their editorial the other day, it really is not so much a revenue problem. The revenues have been pretty constant. And in fact, if anything, the amount of revenue we're getting, even with the Trump tax cut in place, they've been pretty steady. It's just that the spending has taken off like a rocket ship.
Exactly. The economy pretty consistently delivers somewhere about 17% of GDP as tax revenue. And what's interesting, right, Steve, is that, as you know, no matter how much we really increase or lower the rates, you still get about the same right amount of revenue. Yeah. And so you're absolutely right. Because we have a record-sized economy, we have record-sized tax revenues. And despite those records, we're still not keeping pace with the spending growth. You're right. We don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem.
Well, in addition to that, EJ, I was looking at these numbers on the receipts that come into the government, and I was surprised to see that the corporate tax receipts, because we have a corporate income tax, and Trump, I think very wisely lowered our rate from the highest in the world at, we're at about 41% down to about 25%, which is, closer to the international average. And once we did that, a lot of the money started coming back in the United States because taxes do determine where money is invested. And so lo and behold, the corporate tax revenues since Trump did the rate reduction have almost doubled. Did you know that?
I didn't know they had doubled. That's phenomenal, though. And one of the reasons why it's so good that they cut the rate was exactly what you just mentioned, Steve. You have all of these businesses that are now coming back this re-onshoring, if you will, to the United States. And instead of that business, instead of that tax revenue going to some foreign government, it's going to the U.S. Treasury instead. I think that's a win-win.
You would think so. You would think so, my friend. And so let's get to the most important issue of all. And it's the reason I brought you on, EJ, is that I'm asked all the time by my listeners. I get emails, I get letters, I get phone calls, I get texts. People are saying, okay, how is this going to end? In other words, how bad can it get? If we allow this Biden baseline, that takes the deficit up $2 trillion a year, that lands us in 10 years at a $50 trillion national debt. How is this going to end? I mean, it cannot have a happy ending, but how do you see it playing out if we continue to do this?
Well, unfortunately, I think it's just going to be more of the same. In other words, what we saw the last 3 years, but just a whole heck of a lot more of it. And,
Right.
Fortunately, this is not foreordained. This can be changed.
Yes, it can.
The Great
Yes.
Depression, for example, that did not have to happen. There was a crash in 1929, of course, but then it was the policies of Hoover and then the policies of FDR that continuously made the Depression worse and kept that going for over a decade. And so if we continue down the path that we're on right now, I think that's how bad it can get. So
that lasted 10 years. That was a 10-year depression. And you're right. What did they do? They had what could have been just a short-term financial crisis, the crash of 29. And then, as our friend Amity Schlaze notes, almost every government response to the financial crisis was exactly the wrong thing to do. More regulations, tax rates that went up, as high as 80, 70, 80, 90%. You had the Smoot-Hawley tariff. You had one bad policy after another. And as our friend Amity Schlaze says, Hoover and Roosevelt, two of our worst presidents, in my opinion, actually turned a financial crisis into a Great Depression. And my point is, EJ, I don't want to see that happen again to our country.
Steve, I'm right there with you. This is absolutely the last thing we want. But unfortunately, that's the trajectory that we're headed down. Now, it does seem like both this government and the Treasury, the Federal Reserve at all levels, it seems like their intent is not so much to cause another recession or depression, so much as it is to just inflate away the real value of the debt, because every time they decrease the value of the dollar, what that ends up doing is making it cheaper in real terms for the government to repay its debt. Now, it impoverishes Americans in the process, but that's how they've been keeping down, if you will, the real cost of servicing this debt. And I think that's the play going forward.
I think that is certainly a plausible scenario, and that's what they've done so far. Is they just keep printing money, right? So we spend, we borrow, and to pay off the bonds, we print money, and that could now. There's another scenario, as you know, EJ, which is that Joe Biden, if you listen to him, he says all we have to do is raise taxes on the rich. If we just get rid of the Trump tax cut and make the rich pay their fair share, we can lower the deficit.
Well, like we were saying earlier, Steve, no matter how much you increase those rates, you can't get blood from a stone. You really never seem to get much higher than about 17% of the economy in terms of tax revenue. That's just where things cap out for a whole lot of different reasons. But I find it so ironic that they keep talking about the rich paying their fair share. If you let the Trump tax cuts expire, one of the things that will do is you will go back to unlimited SALT deductions. As you know, Steve, you were part of this whole process.
Yeah.
And what will happen is you will have...
Hold on. Explain to people what the SALT deduction was for people who are not familiar with that.
Oh, certainly. So SALT is an acronym for state and local tax deductions. And what this allows is for people to actually deduct from their federal tax returns how much they pay in state and local taxes. Now, for the vast majority of us, we don't actually pay that much in state and local taxes relative to our incomes. So it's just not worth it for us to have this deduction. But if you're a very wealthy person in a high tax state, in other words, if you're a Democrat donor in a Democrat-run state, this is extremely valuable to you. It saves you literally millions of dollars for high income earners in a place like Manhattan. And so what happened is by capping that deduction at $10,000, the Trump tax reform actually ensured that those people would be paying their fair share. And what does Biden want to do? He wants to overturn that. He wants to put it back to the way it was, where those very wealthy Democrats in those Democrat-run cities and states can get more tax returns.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought this up because, having worked on that Trump tax plan and worked with Congress and worked with Trump and helped put this thing together, I was always the person in the room because there was always pressure to reinstate the state and local tax deduction. And I was always insistent that we get rid of it because I didn't. And look, I know that most of our audience, most of you live in high tax states like Connecticut, New Jersey, and New York, but it's just not fair. And by the way, if you're concerned about that and you're a wealthy person, then you have two choices: either get New York and New Jersey or California or wherever you live to lower their taxes, which would serve to make sense. I mean, you got Florida and Texas that have no income tax at all, or move out. And by the way, we did a study, Laffer and I, right after that bill passed, predicting that these states would lose well over 1 million people if they didn't change their tax systems, and they didn't. And guess what? They've lost. We underestimated how many people would move out.
Right. Steve, exactly. That's 100% right. And I think it just goes to show you that not only are these tax loopholes, things like the SALT deduction, not only are they a handout to wealthy individuals in high tax states, but they're also really a handout to those local governments, those state governments that impose these high taxes. Because if no one was able to deduct any of these state and local taxes, what would happen? Residents would just be in an absolute uproar, and they would demand reforms at those different levels of government. But by transferring that tax liability to other taxpayers in places like you mentioned, Steve, Texas and Florida, you are essentially absolving those state and local governments from having any fiscal responsibility.
You're so right about that. And in fact, take it a step further. One of my greatest crusades of my career has been to privatize state and local services. And so think about this, folks, if you think we should bring back the state and local tax deduction. If you move into some towns, and you want your garbage collected, in many towns, you just go into the phone book, EJ, if they still make phone books, and you just look up a private company and you contract with the company and they will come and collect your garbage. And if you want 2 days a week, 4 days a week, 1 day a week, you just do it through a private contract. And yet other communities have the government picking up their garbage. And my point is that when you have a state and local tax deduction, you get a tax deduction if the government collects your garbage, but you don't get a tax deduction if a private company does. So you're slanting everything towards more and more government services rather than private services, and that isn't a very good idea either.
100%, Steve, and it's kind of like how we look at educational reform. I know you're a huge advocate for school choice and for parental freedoms. Parents should be able to send their kids to any school. They shouldn't be simply limited based on a coincidence of geography of where they live. And we find the exact same problems with education, where the whole system is grossly slanted towards public education. And if you do want to send your kid to private schools, in most cases, you not only still have to pay your property taxes to fund your local failing public school, you have to pay private tuition too.
You have to pay twice. Well, that's EJ Antoni, economist extraordinaire, good friend. He works at the Heritage Foundation. He works with us at Unleash Prosperity. Always spot on, EJ. Thanks so much for coming on this afternoon, and I hope you have a great weekend, my friend.
Thank you for having me, Steve.
Folks, we'll be right back. This is the More Money Show on WABC.
Long Island is more exciting than ever at Jake's 58 Casino Hotel. Get ready to zoom into some serious cash with Zoom Ball every Wednesday in June. Win up to $500,000. 1 point equals 1 entry. 2 lucky winners will be drawn at the top of every hour from 1 to 5 p.m. to play Zoom Ball. Discover the excitement at Jake's 58 Casino Hotel. If gambling is a problem for you or something, please call the 24-hour toll-free helpline at 877-8-HOPE or text NY.